You know, I will say one thing, though. Because I talked to a lot of people on the internet, and a lot of atheists, you know what they would do to you? Here's what they would say. They'd say, Dr. Simon, you're nobody. Who do you think you are? Just because you have a PhD and one of the best experts in allergies in our whole metropolis, and you've had that PhD for decades upon decades, I don't want to give how many, but basically, just because you have all that scientific experience, you don't know anything if you dare to question evolution.
Okay, now here's my thinking. Number one, the Big Bang Theory, as I understand it, it says that in the beginning there was nothing, and then it exploded. Mm-hmm. And then we had everything. Mm. And now that doesn't really make sense to anybody, I don't think.
You know, why don't you go to a vacuum store, go to a vacuum company, and ask them if the vacuum requires anything, okay? Because they're going to tell you it requires a lot of energy to make a strong vacuum.
Yeah.
And I saw Stephen Hawking's little presentation of that, and I was like amazed. You know, if you got a bad idea, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Okay?
That's good.
Because he's just sitting there saying, well, there was nothing, and there was this big vacuum that just made everything pop out of nothing. And, you know, it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense.
Now, here's another point. You know, Darwin himself said that according to his theory, there should be lots and lots of transition forms in the fossil record. Well, when Darwin was writing his theory, they hadn't really explored very much of the fossil record, but now we have. And Darwin says, well, if there are not a lot of transitional forms in the fossil record, then my theory falls apart. And it does. And they're not transition forms in the fossil record.
I went through many famous evolutionists and scientists in each generation. One that comes to mind is Gaylord Simpson, besides Darwin himself, kind of saying we haven't found any transitional forms.
Right.
There's a really famous one from Harvard, and his name is kind of skipping my mind, but he admitted that there hadn't been any transitional forms. Yeah. I think he was trying to come up with an evolutionary leaps idea.
Yeah.
And then Richard Dawkins recently, about 2 years ago, said, all right, everybody, the transitional forms and the fossil record, we're not going to use that argument anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, he couldn't successfully debate it, so he said, let's back off from that. And, you know, that's what you're dealing with. Think about it like this. If you have a bat, okay, you have to get some sort of monkey rat thing before you get to the bat. And it has to have these flopping membranes.
Yeah.
And it can't fly. You have to wait for it to evolve for like 1 million years or so.
Yeah.
So, you know, what is that flopping bat thing going to do to survive? Because it's survival of the fittest, but anybody fit is going to say, okay, a snake's going to say, I can snag that membrane and kill that thing easy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so...
And if you look at the fossil record, it turns out that there's one of the very ancient layers of rock is the Cambrian layer, and it's full of all kinds of life forms. Mm-hmm. Boom, all of a sudden. And,
you know, I'll be honest, my belief on that, there is a little bit of speculation here, but not much, is that that Precambrian layer, maybe that's the layer of dirt that smashed all these animals in the Great Flood.
Right.
Okay. Because, and I have seen some expert geologists and stuff like that kind of say, perhaps there was a Great Flood. Now, they'll put in their evolutionary thing. They'll put it like, oh, millions and millions of years ago.
Yeah.
How do you know the millions of years? So they'll say, well, it's based on the rock layers. Now, none of these rocks add up to the system they have. This geological column, you can only find it in the books. You can't find it in the ground. Okay, but they'll have this geological column, and they'll say, that's how we know how old things are. And you say, well, how do you know how old the rocks are? And they're like, well, it's because of which fossils are in there. And they say, okay, well, how do you know how old the fossils are? Well, it's according to which columns they're in.
Right, so it's circular reasoning.
Yeah.
Okay, now, one of the other things that evolution requires is that you have to develop living things from non-living things, which is totally impossible, has never happened, and the scientists have a nervous breakdown trying to get different kind of soups and chemicals and atmospheres and shocking it and everything, and they never could get anything living out of non-living material.
And you know what'll happen is they'll have like little pieces of stuff like this MIT guy just really kind of had his supercomputer together, and he figured out that, you know, if we have so many billions of years of blah blah blah, we can finally get a strand of RNA together. Just we're talking about a strand. I mean, like a little slither or something. Oh, I made a bone of a snake. You know, it doesn't make a big, you know, impression on actually making a cell. A cell requires 1 trillion separate parts.
Yeah, and they're like little machines inside there. Now, see, when Darwin wrote, he thought that bacteria were just like a little piece of dirt or plasma or blood or something, and they didn't realize, like you said, that there's lots of machines inside the smallest bacteria, and which is probably the smallest independent living organism.
Let me throw this at you. Have you ever heard of a concept called junk DNA?
Yeah.
Junk DNA, now this is part of one of those predictions. Okay, the evolutionary biologists predicted that 90% of the cell was just, you know, chemical matter that just,
didn't do anything.
Yeah, it didn't do anything, and basically it might have been part of something here, something there. Well, they finally mapped the genomes and all that kind of stuff, and everything had a source, and everything had a part, and everything was functioning.
Yeah.
And yet you'll still have some websites out there that are still trying to argue for junk DNA. But there have been people, there was a guy who, I think this might have been similar, maybe not the same thing, but a guy who tried to get his article peer-reviewed, and they denied him because he was denying ideas like junk DNA. And later on, the guy who failed at peer review, same idea, won the Nobel Prize. So, you know, they're against progress. They're not really going for science because they don't submit to facts. They just tell a story and tell more.
Here's the thing. They say, oh, well, it doesn't seem possible, but over billions and billions of years, it will happen.
Yeah, you just make it up as you go along. Oh, throw 1 billion here, throw 1 million there. You know, the age of the Earth has been getting older, more than by time, but by guesses.
Yeah.
You know, they were only arguing for like maybe 1 million, couple million years old back when you had Darwin and Lyell, the uniformitarian geologist guy. They were only arguing for about 1 million years or so. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, now we're at 4.6 billion. And you know, can you imagine a detective doing that? You know, just throwing around the time scales and stuff like that. Oh yeah, we'll just fit it in here.
See,
you know?
One of these examples that's been used a lot is that if you take some dynamite and go into a junkyard and blow it up, that when it all settles down, you'll have a 747 airplane there. And it doesn't matter, you know, that's absurd. And the more you blow it up, it doesn't matter if you blow it up 1 million times and millions and millions and millions of times and millions and millions and millions of years, it's never going to form a 747.
Now, and let's get to the basic ideas that they want to set forth as logical. Number one, the word science means knowledge. Okay. Now, they'll claim that all science is just their knowledge. Man's, you know, an island unto himself and all this kind of stuff. But then you have to ask yourself, when it comes to the laws of science, the laws of knowledge, how did mass operate under knowledge? How does the universe have scientific laws? How many are there? Why do they stay the same? Here's another one. If everything evolved out of this big singularity, Big Bang, where did time come from?
And what was there before it exploded?
Yeah, what was there before time? You know.
Now, you know, this little article by D. James Kennedy in the front of his Bible, it has a tremendous number of ideas that show that there's a lot of organization and order in the universe. And these are, he uses as arguments in favor of the idea that there is a God. So I was really impressed with this. For example, he says the size of the planet Earth is exactly right. If it was 10% bigger or smaller,
And
there
the
wouldn't be
oceans would flood, or the
yeah,
ozone layer would fall apart.
yeah,
You know, the one I like to think about when we talk about the solar system is that you have the moon and the sun operating on this perfect wavelength where the moon, you know, we have like solar eclipses about every 2 years. And for that to happen, you know, the moon had to be a perfect shape that's about 400 times smaller shape, 400 times away, you know, just so they could line up just
Yeah,
right every 2
yeah.
years. Well, that is the same moon that is churning our oceans so that
Right.
it doesn't get poisoned.
yeah,
And meanwhile, the sun is at a precise place so that there's just enough heat to kind of go on there. And so all these different things are acting just right. And if you change them a little bit, if there was a difference in density, like what we see all over the universe, it couldn't have happened. If our sun was any different, there could have been massive amounts of radiation that would have stopped life instantly. And we've never, ever seen anything like a planet that was anywhere close to being
Right.
able to inhabit life.
See, and he goes into that too. He says, if the moon wasn't exactly where it was and exactly the size, the tides wouldn't be there the way they are, and we need the tides to put oxygen in the ocean so the plankton can grow and provide the oxygen that we need. And it's the food chain begins with the plankton.
You know, when the evolutionists try to put it together, the moon is moving away about an inch a year from the Earth. Now, you put, you know, a couple billion inches, and all of a sudden, the moon's got, you know, all the oceans with these giant, massive tidal waves destroying all life.
Yeah,
You know, when we look at the salt that is, I believe it's coming out of the oceans, you go back in time, and the salt would be going into the oceans. Well, about 100 million years ago, the oceans would be block solid salt.
yeah.
And they're going to say that 3 billion years behind the 100 million years, 3 billion years ago, they're going to say that the first cell, a trillion parts, formed together in rock solid salt.
Yeah, he says the tilt of the Earth is exactly what it has to be. And he says the atmosphere that we breathe is, you know, 78% nitrogen and oxygen and everything. And so there's no atmosphere like it in all the known universe. So he says we have to have nitrogen in the soil for the plants to grow, and God provides the lightning to fix the nitrogen so that it would get into the earth. Here's the DVDs. This is about the Islam immigration. 2 of them I want to send you, and here's the calendar for this year. And if you'll call that, we'll send them right out to you. The number to call is 893-2444. Amen. God bless you, and tune in again next week for the rest of the news.